The day I drove to pick up Callista, the usually cold and aloof daughter of a wealthy family, she actually sat in the back seat of my car with a male colleague from the company. The two of them were very affectionate with each other, as if I were their driver. I was extremely excited because I knew that this marriage was finally over. When she got in the car, I was stunned for a moment. She didn't sit in the passenger seat but chose the back seat with another man. The man smiled slightly and greeted me politely. "Hello, Mr. Bryan." I looked at him with a confused expression and turned my gaze to Callista. She lowered her eyes to answer the phone, seemingly unaware of the tension. We had agreed to go to the auction together that day. I had been looking forward to this date and planned to buy the ancient jade pendant at the event as a gift for her. I didn't expect her to get into my car with another man. The man, seeing that I ignored him, explained with a wry smile. "Mr. Bryan, my name is Steph. I'm Miss Callista's new assistant." He adjusted his glasses politely, his demeanor scholarly. "I heard you were going to a private auction tonight, so I asked Miss Callista if I could come along to broaden my horizons." "Don't worry, I won't disturb you." My heart sank instantly. I knew this woman too well. She had always maintained boundaries and knew how to keep her distance from other men. We got together because of marriage and, after much consideration, chose each other. Some said we would live separate lives after marriage. But once our relationship was confirmed, Callista would hug my arm, act coquettishly, and her eyes would redden with emotion. She once said, "Husband, I married you to be your wife. Husband and wife are one. You can only be good to me." But something seemed to have changed. And I am not someone who swallows his pride. I'm a real man who doesn't tolerate disrespect. Gritting my teeth, I said, "Get out." I kicked him out without mercy. The man was stunned. He didn't expect to be humiliated on our first meeting. Perhaps my tone was too harsh. Steph was at a loss. He stammered, "I'm sorry, Mr. Bryan. I don't quite understand," his voice trembling in panic. He looked at Callista anxiously. She had just ended her call and, seeing my anger, showed a trace of dissatisfaction. She said nothing, just fastened her seatbelt silently. One pretended not to understand, and the other acted as if she didn't hear me. I was furious. I snapped, "Do you think I'm your driver? You don't understand plain words?" The tension in the car thickened. The man was so scared he didn't dare speak. Callista frowned slightly and said quietly, "If you're in a bad mood today, let's just go home." In the rearview mirror, the man's expression was awkward. Annoyed, I got out of the car, walked to Steph's side, opened the door, and said, "Steph, right? I'm not in the mood to go to the auction or talk nonsense. I'll say this one last time, get out, or I won't be polite." The man clenched his teeth and looked at Callista. She said nothing, just pouted and scrolled through her phone. Sulking, he had no choice but to get out. Callista wouldn't lose face in front of outsiders. She always knew how to manage emotions. She wanted us to go home and deal with this privately, as we had always done. She hugged my arm and said, "Steph just graduated. He's new and naive. Why make things difficult for him? He didn't mean anything by sitting in the back. Do you think you're the driver?" I replied blankly, "It's the first time." Callista asked in confusion. "What?" I said, "This is the first time in all these years you've been so close to another man. You say he's naive for sitting in the back, then what does that make you? Sitting with him?" Callista finally realized what I cared about. Everyone in our social circle knew how exceptional she was. Countless people had pursued her, but she remained pure and had never been in a relationship before me. Callista smiled faintly, shook my arm, and said, "I actually made my husband jealous." Then she kissed me and said sweetly, "I'm sorry, it was my oversight. He's just a colleague. I would never have anything more with him." Looking into my eyes, she assured me seriously, "But I wasn't stupid." Even though I had only met Steph once, I could tell he had other intentions toward Callista. I thought the first meeting was bad enough. But the next day, the jade pendant I had asked an agent to buy appeared in Steph's hand. Roy, general assistant of Callista Group, sent me a photo and a screenshot from social media. In the photo, the ancient jade pendant was in Steph's palm. He appeared to be playing with it, or flaunting it. His eyes were cold, but the corner of his mouth curled in satisfaction. as if he had taken revenge. He must have received it as a gift after being humiliated. The screenshot from his social feed said, "Thank you, Sister Callista, for the soul-soothing chicken soup. She said that as long as you work hard, you'll get what you deserve. I'll keep pushing forward to win a beautiful, wealthy woman and reach the peak of life." Several fist-clenching emojis followed. My blood almost froze, though it's hard to admit. I was truly infuriated. It felt like a flawless jade I cherished had cracked. That feeling was unfamiliar, almost laughable. I even wanted to drive my Lamborghini and smack him in the face. But when I looked at my hands, I realized I had taken a small-time schemer seriously. Pathetic. I called Brinang Chen, who sold jade. His voice was filled with joy. He assured me, "Don't worry, Mr. Brian, even if we have to dig out Kunlun Mountain, I'll supply everything and deliver them all to you." That day, before getting off work, I sent jade pendants worth 200.000 yuan each to everyone at Callista Group, except Steph. 46 people in total. Men received guanyin, and women received Buddha. Though they weren't as valuable as the ancient jade, the gesture was greater in number and fair. Roy, ever efficient, made sure everyone posted on their moments. "Thank you, Mr. Brian, for your spiritual advice." He said that choice is more important than effort. Don't fall for a thief's pua. I clenched my fists, punched the king of curls, and stepped on the thief. Yes, my godfather. Those who received the gifts were naturally happy to cooperate. Several secretaries and the general manager's office, being the gossip center of the company, received the gifts from me and were excited to post pictures and write articles. Some clever people even added a sentence to the caption, "As long as the medical expenses are covered, I will go wherever Mr. Brian points." The secretaries and assistants might not hold much power in the company, but their communication abilities across departments were formidable. Within half an hour, the entire company knew that Mr. Brian had given everyone a 200.000 yuan gift. As for the reason, all the major gossip groups were already discussing it. The two colleagues next to Steph looked at him and laughed meaningfully. Steph turned pale and felt like he was sitting on pins and needles, as if he had been deeply insulted. Clutching the ancient jade tightly, he got up and went to the bathroom. The ridicule behind him grew more blatant. On impulse, he returned the item intact. Callista had just finished talking to her father. Seeing Steph frown and hand over the pendant, she asked in confusion, "What's wrong?" Steph sighed deeply, shook his head, and said disappointedly, "Miss Callista, you'd better return this. I can't accept it." Although Callista didn't understand what was going on, her intuition told her something must have happened. She didn't ask directly but looked at him quietly. Steph hesitated repeatedly before finally telling her everything that had happened in the office that day. He said, "Miss Callista, I'm really sorry. I might have caused you trouble. I just posted something to motivate myself. I don't know how Mr. Brian found out." He added regretfully, "I didn't expect President Brian to be so angry." Sincerely, he said, "Miss Callista, I want to apologize to President Brian. I can explain everything to him in person." Callista felt that someone in the company must have spread rumors again. There was clearly nothing between her and Steph. Yet people loved to gossip. And somehow Brian had found out. She said, displeased, "That's too much." That night, Callista and Steph came together. The man looked timid and avoided eye contact. Callista pursed her lips and said, "Steph wants to speak to you directly." She tucked her hair behind her ears and added, "Hubby, Chung is just a colleague. Because of what happened yesterday, I gave him the gift you gave me as an apology from you. That's all." I ate peanuts and took a sip of white wine. Steph said, "Mr. Brian, I'm sorry." He bowed sincerely, trembling with fear. "Mr. Brian, you are a magnanimous person. Please don't hold it against me. It was the first time I'd received something so valuable. I was so happy I lost my mind. If I did anything to upset you, please tell me. I'll change immediately." I took another sip of wine and said, "Steph, right?" He nodded slowly, glancing at me like a student seeking reassurance from a teacher during an oral exam. Looking at this immature boy trying to challenge me, I found it amusing. I said, "I'm not your teacher. I'm not your leader either. And I don't have time to teach you how to behave. But Callista is my wife. So if I find out someone is involved with her, I won't let it go. Do you understand? This might have been the first time Steph encountered someone so direct. His increasingly embarrassed expression was filled with fear. Callista grabbed my arm and said, "Hubby, you're overthinking it. That's impossible. She knows my character and methods. Even if she didn't agree with what I did, she could understand my feelings." So she didn't argue, but let Steph apologize. She was trying to ease the tension and hoped I would let it go. We're both smart people. We can read each other's intentions with a glance. I said, "I understand." I decided to give Callista a chance. After all, she hadn't betrayed me. The interests between the Brian and Callista families were also deeply intertwined. Divorce would be costly. I said, "But there won't be a next time. No matter who it is." Callista said, "You didn't have to deal with Steph like that." Before bed, she brought up the topic. I said, "Even if I was wrong, you should have talked to me first instead of deciding on your own." Looking at her through the mirror as she sat at the vanity fixing her hair, I added, "You knew it was a gift from me. Yet you gave it away. Isn't it normal for me to be angry? I don't want to wonder whether I can still love someone like you if you lose your purity." Callista fixed her hair, went to the bar, and poured herself a glass of ice water. She pouted and said, "Steph couldn't sleep all night because of your misunderstanding. This morning, he looked exhausted, so I gave him the gift you had given me to apologize." That's all there was to it. I stared at her coldly for a long time. The money from the ancient jade auction was nothing to me, and giving it away was understandable. But this wasn't about the money. It was about why you gave it to him and why you apologized on my behalf. Callista rested her chin in one hand, lightly tapping her cheek with her fingertips. She was waiting for me to speak. This was the first conflict in our relationship caused by a third party. Our upbringing made us both tired of this kind of situation. We both valued dignity. I frowned and said, "Callista, I love you." She paused, clearly not expecting me to say that. I continued, "I love the spotless version of you. That's what makes you different. You used to have clear boundaries and knew how to keep your distance from the opposite sex because you valued emotional purity. You wanted a clean marriage. And me, you know I wasn't like that before. But your values influenced me. Our goals aligned. I hope our marriage never strays." Callista said aggrievedly, "I didn't do anything." She understood what I meant and decisively ended any ambiguity with Steph. Embarrassed, she asked her father to transfer him out of her department. As an intern, Steph could only start from the most basic tasks. In the past, he had chances to follow senior colleagues on business trips. Now, Roy didn't assign him any shifts at all. I didn't order anyone to make things difficult for him. But these situations don't need my involvement. Many people flatter the powerful and trample the weak. With the leader against him, he was excluded from everything. Within half a month, Steph couldn't handle the pressure. He looked haggard and kept making mistakes at work. The turning point came after a department meeting. That day, Steph was harshly criticized by several leaders for a mistake he had made. They criticized everything from his business ability to his worth as a human being. The tone was aggressive, and he didn't even have time to breathe. The team leader waved the folder and sneered, "Do you see this line? For others, it's the moral bottom line. But for you, it's the standard of a saint." Steph lowered his head and admitted his mistakes in a low voice. His shoulders trembled slightly, and he seemed rooted to the spot. This scene happened to be witnessed by Callista, who had temporarily come to the purchasing department to retrieve some information. Seeing Callista arrive, Steph felt uneasy. He held his forehead to ease the embarrassment. But Callista simply stood at the door and looked at him in silence. Her gaze in such a moment made Steph's self-esteem as a man crumble. He said, "Miss Callista." He clenched his teeth, and his entire face turned red. He wasn't acting. Callista had always been the son he loved but could never reach. When he was marginalized, he had nearly accepted his fate. Now that the woman he loved had seen him in such a miserable state, he stood up, kicked over the chair, pushed Callista aside, and rushed out the door. After not seeing each other for half a month, the once cheerful and confident Steph had become so fragile. This was the first time Callista had gotten angry with me. She returned home furiously and knocked over the water cup on the table. The glass shattered, and water splashed everywhere. She shouted, "Why won't you let him go? Brian, I respect you and love you. I've tolerated your insults and the harm you've caused him time and time again. Do you enjoy bullying the weak?" I remembered that when Callista was studying abroad, her younger brother, who was in junior high school, had jumped off a building and committed suicide due to school bullying. That became an indelible scar in her heart, and she despised such behavior. She said, "Brian, you really make me sick. If you keep bullying others like this, I won't stand by and do nothing." I stared blankly at the hysterical woman before me. For the first time since we got married, Callista had lost her temper with me over another man. It was a terrible feeling, like broken glass, like spilled water that couldn't be reversed. Callista transferred Steph back despite Roy's objections. Without Callista Cheng's permission, Roy was dismissed without authorization. Callista asked sharply, "Our Callista family doesn't need an ungrateful person like you. Who are you really working for?" Roy was stubborn in certain matters. He said, "First of all, I'm the president's assistant. You have no right to fire me. Secondly, miss, I'm helping you. Some matters I discuss with President Brian privately, but they're purely personal." Callista threw the shift schedule in front of Roy and asked, "Really? So noble sounding. But does your so-called professional ethics allow you to bully others?" Roy was speechless. He knew he'd been caught for humiliating Steph, and fear was written all over his face. Callista saw through it instantly. She said, "My father must have been blind to trust someone as despicable as you. You mix private grievances with public duties and suppress your colleagues. How dare you stay in our Callista group?" Roy walked out of the office dejectedly. Several senior employees outside looked concerned. They asked, "Brother Chen, are you really leaving?" Roy forced a smile and said, "Yes, I'm leaving. See you around." Brothers, Callista and I fell into an unprecedented Cold War. She stayed in a hotel. Steph came as her assistant to pick up her clothes and cosmetics. She was being completely willful. When Callista gets angry, no one has it easy. Irina, who lives with us, had already received the call and packed Callista's daily necessities. Steph was probably afraid of me. He took the suitcase Irina had packed and left obediently by taxi. Before leaving, he said, "Miss Callista said if you ever need anything, you can contact me. This is my phone number." I smiled and replied, "There's no need to contact anyone. Tell her to stay as far away as possible." Steph didn't understand how I could still be so tough while Callista was staying in a hotel. Confusion filled his eyes, but there was also a hint of hidden joy. Irina shook her head and gently advised, "Sir, why not just apologize and bring her back? How can two people who rarely argue suddenly become like this?" Irina had been with me for more than 10 years. We had grown attached over time. Callista must be waiting for me to admit my mistake and apologize. Right? Ridiculous. Why should I be the one to apologize? Callista never returned, but Steph suddenly became very active. He updated his status daily. Almost all about Callista. He drove a luxury car to pick her up and drop her off at work. He posted invitations from private equity funds and photos with various industry leaders. In short, he flaunted everything he could without leaving anything out. His posts received over 100 likes. Someone even suggested he start a livestream to showcase the daily life of the upper class. Several mutual friends sent me screenshots of his posts. Puzzled, with question marks attached, someone joked, "If you want to know where Callista is, just check his status. You'll figure it out. We're all smart people, and we speak frankly." In the past, Callista and I always attended events together. Even if I couldn't go, my assistant would accompany her. But now, the one by her side is Makoto Ito. I didn't have the energy to respond to my friend's kind reminders. So I simply sent back a thank you emoji. At that time, I was privately consulting Brian's accounting and legal affairs teams to assist with the property division, a massive and complex task due to our marriage and the intertwined shareholding of our two groups. There were also family funds, various properties, metals, stocks, ships, and countless other investments. I even needed to see property certificates and photos to vaguely recall some of our overseas holdings. It all took time to organize. One day, I received a call from Callista. She said, "Mom invited us to dinner." I replied, "Let's just act as if nothing happened." Like usual, the driver went to the airport to pick up Callista and then came to get me. And we went to her home together. Callista and Steph sat in the back seat again, leaving the passenger seat for me. Steph's smugness was obvious. I almost laughed at the scene. But this time, I said nothing and calmly took the front seat. Callista rolled her eyes and looked out the window. Steph was as talkative as ever, though his demeanor was more mature and composed than usual. He smiled and said, "Mr. Bryan, we just got back from Manhattan today." The old lady wanted to see Callista, so I picked up some gifts along the way and went to visit her together. I said nothing and closed my eyes to rest. Steph was clearly asking for trouble. Callista pursed her lips and remained silent the whole way. When she saw Steph, Callista's mother was a little surprised. Steph greeted and introduced himself skillfully. He seemed to be very good at flattering others. It didn't take long to make Callista's mother laugh. At the dinner table, Steph chatted humorously with Callista's mother about some interesting things at work. Callista's mother nodded with satisfaction and then asked about Callista's life. He also continued the conversation in a very familiar way. The atmosphere at the dinner table suddenly became awkward. Steph was still talking, but in an instant, he realized he had said something wrong. So he shut up awkwardly. He wasn't that stupid. Daily life is a topic only couples should talk about. Callista's mother was no fool. Callista said nothing. I calmly wiped my mouth and said, "Mom, let me tell you something. I'm going to have a son soon." Callista's mother's eyes lit up as she looked at Callista and asked, "Ah, really, Callista? This is great news. When did it happen? That woman who gave me the cold shoulder since I got in the car?" At this moment, she looked at me with surprise. I raised my eyebrows maliciously and said, "We just found out yesterday. The doctor said the child is already 3 weeks old." Callista's mother was overjoyed and wanted to call Callista's father. Only then did Callista react and say, "Bryan, what nonsense are you talking about? When did I get pregnant? I've been out of town with Steph recently." "Okay." When Callista's mother heard this, she looked at us in shock. I smiled and said, "No nonsense. I am indeed going to have a son. I specifically found Professor Feng, a very famous obstetrician and gynecologist. Both mother and child are healthy." I emphasized the words, "I am indeed going to have a son." Callista suddenly understood. It wasn't that we were having a child, but that I was having a son, and this child was my illegitimate one. She shouted, "Bryan!" Callista looked at me angrily but tried her best to restrain her emotions. As if waiting for an explanation, I smiled more proudly and said, "Congratulations to me, Callista. My Bryan family has a successor." She replied with dissatisfaction, "Don't make such jokes. It's not funny." I placed the medical report I had prepared on the table and said, "I'm sorry, this is not a joke. While you and Steph were out on your honeymoon, I was bored and made appointments with several girls to spend the night." Every time I spoke, Callista's face turned uglier. I smiled and continued, "Don't tell me. It's funny how young girls get pregnant so easily. Unlike some people's stomachs, no matter how hard you try, there's no movement." The next second, she swept the entire table in a frenzy. Bowls, plates, and cups crashing to the ground. She screamed, "Shut up." I ignored her anger and asked, "Callista, how does it feel to be cheated on?" Callista could never have imagined that I would blatantly have a mistress and then announce to the world that she was pregnant. She pursed her lips and said, "I never cheated on you." Her voice trembled and her eyes were red. Clearly, this news had a huge impact on her. She said, "We were just working. We never crossed the line. I never cheated." I was too lazy to listen to her excuses. I said, "Work, huh? Steph posts your intimate moments online every day. Are you blind? Even our friends noticed and warned me. Do you still think that's not crossing the line? He took you to see the moon and stars, so naturally I can discuss poetry, songs, and philosophy with other women." Callista rarely cried, but I didn't care. Instead, I felt a bit regretful. I said, "It's a pity you didn't bring another woman home for your mom to meet. Like I did. Compared to your provocative behavior today, I still fall short." Callista couldn't accept it. She felt that nothing inappropriate had happened between her and Steph. There was little communication beyond work. She just hoped Steph would change me and make me less domineering. She didn't understand how things had come to this. Before, she always thought our marriage was stable and happy. In front of Callista's mother, Steph quickly explained, "Mr. Bryan, Callista and I are innocent. I've spoken with Mrs. Callista on the phone a few times. To facilitate work, I used this opportunity to visit. It's all part of the job. You've never been a worker, so you don't know how hard it is. As an assistant, I have to handle everything. But there's absolutely nothing inappropriate between Miss Callista and me." Steph looked calm and seemed to have a clear conscience. I curled my lips and smiled. "Really? From the first time you and Callista sat together and asked me to drive, to today when you asked to be the co-pilot, did all your efforts go to waste?" I exposed her mercilessly. Steph was speechless and didn't know how to respond. I didn't let Callista off either. I said, "Speaking of this, we have to mention Roy. He's also an assistant. Isn't he thoughtful too? Why have I never heard that he asked your dad to be his driver? Or that he sat with your mom? Or that Roy took care of your mom in a hotel? You said your dad was blind for reusing Roy. I think you're not just blind. You must have something wrong with your brain." Callista was breathing heavily, her eyes red. I said, "Let's get a divorce." Callista followed me home, leaving Steph at her parents' house. It was her first time home since our Cold War. I had already dealt with everything, even the live-in maids. Arenas had been dismissed. Callista stopped in her tracks, stunned. This home, where we had lived together for 3 years, now felt unfamiliar. She finally realized the divorce was premeditated. Her eyes turned red with disbelief. She hugged my arm tightly and said, "Bryan, I didn't cheat." Her lost and aggrieved voice lingered in my ears. She said, "Please ask that woman to abort the child. Can we start over?" As if I had heard a joke. I retorted, "Is something wrong with your brain? That's my son. Why should I ask her to abort him?" My calmness seemed to hurt Callista deeply. She bit her lip and said, "I didn't do anything. You know that very well." I shook off her arm and said, "Yes, I know. You're still clean. But what's the point? You asked Steph to come to the house to pick up your suitcase, knowing it would disgust me. You attended all events with him, knowing I'd be criticized. You knew everything, but you still did it. You allowed him to provoke me, humiliate me, and push me into submission. You said I bullied the weak. But Callista, did you see how that so-called weak person kept crossing my boundaries?" I sighed, thinking back on everything. I couldn't believe how fragile our marriage turned out to be. I asked, "You knew he was interested in you. I warned you long ago." Callista, compared to ignorance, knowingly committing a mistake is far more destructive. Callista's body trembled. She stood unsteadily, her voice barely audible. She choked and said, "I'm sorry, husband. He just reminds me of my brother. I'm afraid you will become the kind of monster I hate." She cried and said, "I have never had any thoughts about him." Looking at Callista's tearful face, my heart remained calm. Maybe she is innocent, but I am not interested in continuing to invest when I know that the risks are greater than the returns. Callista did not agree to divorce. She even got drunk at a bar and was almost taken advantage of. After receiving the call, I had no choice but to take her home. She didn't make a fuss when she was drunk. She was quiet and at the mercy of others. But when I was about to leave, her eyes were red and she pulled my sleeve. She begged weakly, "Hubby, can we not get divorced? If you want this child, you can bring him back. I am willing to be his mother." As for Steph, large companies have their own rules and regulations. They will not fire someone without reason or who has done nothing wrong. It was just that Callista's father deliberately marginalized him, which was undoubtedly sending a signal to the outside world. This young man, who once seemed to have unlimited prospects, went from being the envied lucky one to the object of private ridicule overnight. When Steph found me, he had completely lost his former spirit. He gritted his teeth and said, "I met you in the company on the day I joined. Such an opening surprised me a little." He said, "That day I served you tea and water and stood by your side waiting for further instructions while you were chatting with Roy. But you never looked at me from beginning to end." He continued with sarcasm, "If it weren't for work, I would never have had the chance to meet a rich second generation like you. You were just born into a good family. So you got to marry Callista. On the night of the auction, I opened the car door for Miss Callista like a gentleman, raised my hand to protect her head, and she got into the car naturally. The tip of her nose brushed the back of my hand, and at that moment, my breath caught. Do you know what she said? She said, "Thank you, Arnold." She also smiled at me gently. I still remember that smile. Steph seemed to relish that memory. I dealt with the waiter and ordered him a cup of coffee. My usual indifference and calmness stabbed at him. His eyes turned red, and hatred flared within them. He gritted his teeth and said, "What qualifications do you, a rich second generation, have to look down on me?" Steph said to me with contempt, "You don't deserve Callista's love at all." I frowned and replied, "Really? Then did you get it?" I remained calm as I looked at this disheveled person with a childish face trying hard to appear composed. He said, "Isn't it because I'm about to succeed? Otherwise, why can't you stand it and want a divorce?" I said slowly, "Because I cheated on her with a mistress and got her pregnant. Don't you know that? You. Steph was choked by my words. His emotions spiraled out of control. He yelled, "Don't you just have some money? What's so great about that?" To put it nicely, he is a rich second generation. To put it bluntly, he is a loser who only relies on his parents. He can't even control his lower body. He is social scum who leaves children everywhere. Do you think Callista will still want to be with you? The next second, with a snap, I slapped him mercilessly and said, "First of all, being rich is great. Secondly, you are a loser. I can leave seeds because I can. But whether a loser like you can leave seeds is another matter. Finally, I've wanted to slap you for a long time. Idiot." Under pressure from the Bryan family, Callista finally agreed to divorce peacefully. The shareholdings of the two families were extensive. The strategic cooperation agreed upon at the beginning benefited both sides. So my parents saw no need to change it. The division of property before marriage was clear, and neither party had any objections. After marriage, we jointly managed finances, and I handled them in an orderly manner. Callista signed calmly. She was like a white swan fallen from its pedestal, its wings broken by itself. The blood was shocking, staining the once white feathers red. We divorced decently and said goodbye. After the child was born, I compensated the mother as agreed, and she left. My mother kept asking me who the child's mother was. I didn't tell her. There was no need. We simply got what we needed. Because the child was a boy, my parents no longer urged me to marry. They planned to train him as the next generation heir while they were still young. As the little brat grew up, he became more and more like me, without the constraints of marriage. I've lived a carefree life in recent years and dated several young and beautiful girlfriends. But to be honest, aside from meeting my needs, I didn't waste much time on them. And I have no plans to marry again. If I have time, I'd rather hang out with my brothers. Roy occasionally told me some news he found. Steph couldn't last 6 months and left. But in this circle, news travels fast. No big company dares to hire him. Callista has become increasingly withdrawn over the past 2 years and refuses to interact with any men. At the end of the year, my father asked me to return to China to represent him at the shareholders' meeting. I knew what my parents were thinking and found it amusing. But I couldn't be bothered to expose them. After the meeting, Callista asked me to drive her home, saying she wanted to visit my parents for New Year's greetings. Ryder likes Callista very much. When I'm not around, he secretly calls her godmother. Callista doesn't refuse and always brings him lots of snacks. During the Lunar New Year, I stayed in China to reunite with my family. Callista stayed at our house and refused to leave. She asked me if I wanted to remarry. But I refused. Marriage is meaningless. Career comes first. If anyone gets in the way of my career, goodbye. But Ryder is visibly happier every time he sees Callista. He insists on sitting between us, calling us mom and dad non-stop. I gently patted his head to tell him to stop. Callista's eyes turned red, and she looked helpless. She had thousands of apologies to say to me, but I don't need them anymore.